No one noticed her as she walked through the mirrored lobby of Titan Tech. Her shoes were cheap, her uniform wrinkled, and her ID badge hung slightly askew. To the security guards, she was invisible. To the executives in designer suits, she was scenery. But Eva Coleman had memorized every step of her path and every blind spot in the building's surveillance system. She knew that no one would look twice at a janitor pushing a cart filled with cleaning supplies. That was the power of invisibility. And that was how she was going to destroy them all. Eva had spent the last 2 years learning how the world of the elite truly worked. Titan Tech was a towering empire of polished steel and glass, a company that presented itself as a beacon of innovation. But behind the glowing screens and staged interviews, Eva had discovered something rotten. Whispers of stolen patents offshore, accounts disappearing whistleblowers, and fake shell corporations all pointed to a coordinated conspiracy, orchestrated by a select group of powerful men who believed they were untouchable. And now she was ready to prove that they weren't. The billionaires who controlled Titan Tech thought in numbers, acquisitions, and quarterly projections. They had forgotten what fear felt like. Eva intended to remind them. She wasn't always a janitor. Once, she had worn a tailored suit and carried a leather briefcase. She had passed the bar at 25 and clerked for one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. But she made the mistake of digging into something she wasn't supposed to find. A hidden fund misdirecting billions through dummy startups led her to Titan Tech. She had brought her findings to her senior partner, hoping for justice. The next day, she was fired, blackballed, and silenced. They took everything from her career, her reputation, and nearly her will to live. But they hadn't taken her mind. Eva disappeared from the legal world. She stopped fighting publicly. Instead, she reinvented herself. She shaved her long hair. She bought second-hand uniforms. She learned to become forgettable. Then she applied for a janitor's position at Titan Tech. When she walked into that building as part of the night cleaning crew, no one recognized her. They didn't even look at her. And that was exactly what she needed. Every evening for 18 months, she cleaned the executive floors. Her gloves carried hidden fingerprint sensors. Her cart held micro cameras. She placed audio recorders in vents, under chairs, inside trophy cases. She mapped the internal servers from stray logins. She tracked badge movements. Slowly, piece by piece, she built her case. What she found wasn't just corruption, it was systemic theft. The men at the top of Titan Tech had built their empire by stealing inventions from their employees, burying competition, and buying judges and regulators like chess pieces. They had entire departments dedicated to laundering money through greenwashing, initiatives and fake AI startups that never produced anything. And the entire board knew about it. The core of their operations rested on one program, an internal AI called Hyperion. On the surface, it was designed to optimize global logistics. In reality, it was used to manipulate markets, inflate valuations, and coordinate insider trades through dozens of untraceable fronts. The code was stored on a secure internal server, only accessible from one physical terminal in the executive boardroom. Eva had memorized every step to get there. She waited for the perfect night. It came on a rainy Tuesday in October. The building was nearly empty due to an executive retreat in Switzerland. Only a skeleton crew remained. Eva entered through the basement, her ID badge cloned from a discarded backup left by a careless IT manager. She took the service elevator to the top floor. At precisely 2:43 a.m., she entered the boardroom. The lights buzzed softly. The long glass table gleamed under dim overhead lights. A massive screen showed stock graphs crawling slowly upward. She sat at the terminal like she belonged there. Her hands flew across the keyboard. She inserted a hidden drive. The screen flickered. A progress bar began to fill. She exhaled quietly. Every file copied. Every secret transaction. Every directive. Every off-the-books contract. She wasn't just stealing data. She was building a confession in code. But Eva wasn't just going to leak it. She had something bigger planned. 2 nights later, Titan Tech held an emergency board meeting. The billionaires had returned from Switzerland in a fury. News had leaked about a potential whistleblower. Their stocks were slipping. Their allies were nervous. Inside the room, 12 men sat around the table, tension thick. On the screen, a file loaded by one of their assistants began to play. It was footage, audio, documents, all laid out methodically. Their crimes, their voices, their contracts, their lies. Panic erupted. Some shouted, others stormed out. The chairman, Richard Voss, barked orders. Find the mole. Shut it down. I want names. But it was too late. The file had already been mirrored and uploaded to dozens of dark web forums and encrypted channels. By the time they disconnected the terminal, the world already knew. Eva watched from the shadows of the service stairwell. She heard the chaos through the walls. She didn't need to be in the room. She had already won. Over the next week, Titan Tech unraveled. Investigations launched. Government raids followed. Whistleblowers within the company stepped forward, emboldened by the leak. Stockholders filed lawsuits. The media tore through every document. The boardroom that once looked invincible now looked like a crime scene. And Eva? She was already gone. She left the city with a new identity, a new look. A flash drive containing evidence of 2 more companies tied to Titan Tech. She had started something much bigger than revenge. She had ignited a movement. They called her the ghost, the insider, the janitor who knew too much. The story spread. Podcasters, journalists, and activists all repeated the legend. But no one ever found her. No one knew her name. And no one realized that she had only just begun. 3 months had passed since Titan Tech crumbled under the weight of its own secrets. The media storm had quieted, but the corporate world remained shaken. Executives tightened security. Whistleblower protection firms saw a spike in activity. Every major CEO in the city now watched their shadows. But Eva Coleman wasn't interested in headlines anymore. She had moved on to her next target. Her new name was Claire Bennett. She lived in a small town outside Chicago, far from the city's corporate skyline. By day, she volunteered at a legal aid clinic. At night, she traced the money trails of the corrupt and powerful. Her apartment was sparse but efficient. A map of interlinked companies covered the far wall. Strings connected boards of directors, funding rounds, law firms, and shell accounts. At the center was a glowing red dot, one name that kept appearing. No matter how deep she dug, Monarch Equities. On paper, Monarch was a private equity firm specializing in biotech and green energy. In reality, it was a front for laundering profits from illegal land grabs and pharmaceutical manipulation. 3 of its founders had once been senior investors at Titan Tech. They had gone underground after the collapse, rebranding themselves through new networks. But Eva had found them again, and she was going to take them down, one by one. Her plan began in silence. She applied for a job under a different contractor, this time not as a janitor, but as night shift security at Monarch's satellite headquarters in Cleveland. The building was sleek, unassuming, and guarded by a rotating private firm. But no one questioned her credentials. Her uniform, posture, and voice were perfect. She had spent weeks rehearsing. Unlike Titan Tech, Monarch's executives were more cautious. They rarely appeared in the building, conducting meetings remotely or in offshore locations. But Eva had learned that every Friday night, one of the senior partners, Gavin Trent, visited the top floor to review quarterly data dumps in person. He preferred using an isolated offline system to avoid leaks. It was during one of those quiet nights that Eva made her move. She waited until 2:17 a.m. The building was empty, except for her and the overnight concierge. She accessed the elevator's maintenance panel with a forged override card and wrote it to the top floor. Her tools were simpler flash drive, a micro recorder, and a tiny magnetic device designed to clone data from the internal servers. The office was minimalistic: black marble floors, white leather chairs. A single monitor glowed against the darkness. Gavin Trent sat behind the desk, brows furrowed, fingers tapping. Eva moved like a shadow. She stayed low. She had memorized the camera angles from the security room earlier. The door's magnetic lock clicked softly open. She slid inside, breath held, heart steady. She moved beneath the desk as Gavin stood to retrieve a file from the shelf. In 8 seconds, she plugged in the device, copied the data, and replaced it with a corrupted version to delay detection. Then she vanished. By morning, the data was uploaded to encrypted forums. The files contained email threads, payment orders, and digital signatures, evidence that Monarch Equities had intentionally shorted life-saving medications during a health crisis for massive profit. It wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Eva knew the leak would spark chaos, but it wasn't enough. Monarch had hidden behind dozens of shadow companies. She needed something more, something personal, that came 2 weeks later. When a journalist named Daniel Frey contacted the forum's encrypted inbox. He'd been tracking Monarch's biotech deals for a year, but lacked hard evidence. Eva arranged a meeting in a neutral location, a closed bookstore with no cameras and no cell signals. Daniel was sharp, cautious, and a little desperate. He had been burned before, nearly blacklisted by the same network of investors. When Eva handed him the Dr. Avon explained what was inside. He looked at her as if he was staring at a ghost. "You're the one from Titan Tech, aren't you?" he whispered. Huff said nothing. She only smiled and disappeared before he could ask her name. The next week, Donald's exposé made headlines across international news outlets. It was more than a leak, it was a reckoning. Former employees of Monarch came forward. Lawsuits poured in. Congressional hearings were called. One by one, the men who thought they had outrun justice were dragged into the light. But the story didn't stop. There, Eva now realized she was part of something larger. The people she had exposed weren't isolated villains. They were part of a system that rewarded silence and punished truth. Every company had its secrets. Every boardroom had its ghosts. And she was going to become the ghost they feared. She began working with a small team of activists and digital vigilantes who called themselves Signal Zero. They operated in complete anonymity, exposing corruption through precise data strikes. Eva became their most valuable asset. She taught them how to navigate the corporate underworld, how to read between the lines of legal documents, and how to weaponize truth. Together, they brought down 3 more firms in the next 6 months. A hedge fund laundering drug cartel money, a social media company selling user data to foreign governments, an energy conglomerate falsifying climate data to avoid penalties. Each time, Eva remained unseen. But the whispers grew louder. Who was the woman behind the curtain? The corporations hired security firms, black hat hackers, and even private investigators to track her down. But Eva was always 10 steps ahead. She had burned her fingerprints, erased her digital history, and changed identities like clothes. What no one realized was that she didn't live in the shadows because she had to. She lived there because it was the only place she could strike from without. Hesitation. But then came the night that nearly exposed her. One of the companies they targeted, Danders Global, wasn't just corrupt. It was violent. After their leak went public, 2 members of Signal Zero were arrested on fabricated charges. One vanished entirely. Eva went dark. She changed cities, changed names again. For the first time, she considered walking away. But then, she remembered the look in Gavin Trent's eyes, the arrogance, the certainty that people like him could never fall. That thought lit a fire inside her once more. Eva came back stronger. She devised a plan to expose Anders Global at the annual World Capital Summit event, where the wealthiest and most powerful CEOs gathered to discuss global finance behind closed doors. This time, she wasn't going in as a janitor or a guard. She would walk in through the front door, invited, using layers of fake credentials. Eva created the identity of an obscure but wildly successful venture capitalist from Singapore. She fabricated articles, interviews, and even a digital portfolio of investments. Within 3 months, she secured a seat at the summit as a rising innovator in clean technology. The night of the summit, she wore a tailored black suit, custom glasses, and a silent earpiece. No one suspected a thing. She walked through the marble atrium of the Grand Meridian Hotel, shaking hands with kings of industry, smiling at cameras, laughing over champagne. In her clutch was a secure drive loaded with explosive data from Anders. Global emails, recordings, encrypted contracts detailing human trafficking routes disguised as shipping data. At 9:42 p.m., she approached the presentation terminal, smiled at the assistant, and asked if she could load her slideshow early. No one questioned her. At 10 p.m., the lights dimmed. A global audience of CEOs, journalists, and investors turned their attention to the stage Dota stud under the spotlights, and the truth detonated. The first slide on the screen was simple. A corporate logo, Anders Global. Beneath it, a caption, "What they don't want you to see." The audience chuckled politely, assuming it was an edgy marketing pitch. But as the next slide appeared, heavily redacted contract with time-stamped emails referencing human transport corridors, the air in the room shifted. Silence fell like a guillotine. Eva's voice was calm, clear, controlled. These files were obtained through a network of internal leaks and cross-referenced with international shipping logs. Over the past 5 years, Anders Global has funded and facilitated the transport of over 4,000 undocumented individuals under the guise of equipment and waste exports. Gasps erupted. Cameras clicked. Phones were raised, though some were quickly ordered to be put away. A few executives reached for their earpieces, whispering to their legal teams. Eva continued, her tone unflinching. Their strategy was simple. Create offshore subsidiaries, mask operations as logistics trials, and bribe enforcement officials to look away. This wasn't a side operation. It was institutionalized, board-approved, profitable. The next slide showed a flowchart. Names, faces, bank accounts, wire transfers, including some of the people in that very room. Suddenly, the presentation screens went dark. Security flooded the hall. But it was too late. Eva had anticipated the kill switch. The entire presentation had already been live-streamed to over 50 independent news networks across the globe. Cloud backups sent automatically to whistleblower organizations. The genie was out. And it wasn't going back in. Eva stepped back from the podium as murmurs turned to shouting. She turned to walk off stage, but not before locking eyes with one of the men sitting in the second row. Franklin Rowe, CEO of Anders Global. His face was flushed, furious, but behind his fury was a flicker of fear. She had pierced the veil. Again, she left the hall amidst chaos, blending into a crowd of panicked investors and guests. By the time security isolated the room and locked the exits, Eva Coleman, once a janitor, now the most elusive ghost in corporate warfare, was already gone. This time, there was no going back. For days, the media was ablaze. The World Capital Summit turned from a prestigious business event into a global scandal. Anders Global's stock collapsed in 48 hours. Franklin Rowe resigned, but not before being subpoenaed by international courts. More than a dozen senior executives were arrested as criminal investigations rolled out across multiple jurisdictions, and yet there was still no trace of the woman who had exposed them. That's when the myth began to grow. Some said she was a disgruntled former employee. Others claimed she was a rogue AI. A few believed she was working for the government, planted as a corporate spy. But the truth was simpler. She was one woman who refused to stay silent. A woman who had once been invisible in a world that only saw power. Her name was Eva Coleman, and she had just changed everything. 2 weeks later, Eva sat in a small coastal cafe in Portugal. Her hair was shorter now, her skin sun-kissed. A new name in her passport, a new identity etched into her SIM card. She sipped her coffee as she watched the morning headlines scroll across a muted television inside. Another executive indicted. Another whistleblower inspired to speak out. She allowed herself a small smile. Across from her sat Daniel Freitha, journalist she had once entrusted with the Monarch data. His career had skyrocketed since. Awards, book deals, but he hadn't forgotten her, you know, he said quietly. You've become a ghost story in Silicon Valley. They speak about you like you're a virus no firewall can stop. Eva looked up, calm. Good. He leaned in, whispering, What now? You've brought down some of the biggest players in the game. You could disappear. Retire. She shook her head. I'm not done. Daniel hesitated and reached into his bag and slid a folder across the table. Then you'll want to see this. Eva opened it. Inside were documents, internal reports, whistleblower notes, and audio recordings. From a defense contractor called Arcanus Industries, a company involved in weaponizing surveillance, AI, and selling backdoors to authoritarian regimes. They're worse than the last ones. Daniel said. Eva scanned the pages, her expression unreadable. Then we burned them too. 3 months later, whispers of a new scandal began to surface. Arcanus Industries denied everything, but journalists started connecting dots. Another mysterious leak, another expose, another fall from power, behind every breach, behind every collapse. There was only one certainty: she was watching, she was listening, and she wasn't going to stop, because she remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to clean the floors while men made decisions that destroyed lives, to be the last one in the building at night, knowing that the ones with power could do whatever they wanted and no one would stop them. So now she did. From the shadows, Eva Coleman became the reckoning. Not a hero, not a villain, just the truth in a world built on lies. It was the coldest winter Berlin had seen in a decade. Snow-blanketed rooftops like secrets waiting to be uncovered. In a modest co-working hub inside MIT, a programmer named Ismail Kig sat hunched over a screen filled with encrypted files. He didn't know who sent them. Just a message: if you believe in freedom, decrypt this. The files revealed Arcanus Industries' collaboration with global surveillance states, microphone chips in children's toys, GPS locks embedded in medical devices, civilian drones designed to look like weather probes, all logged, all active. Ismail hesitated. He'd seen what happened to people who went public with less, but in that same folder was a video file, only 10 seconds long. A woman's voice. You're not alone. He knew that voice. Everyone in the Truth Seeker underground did. It was her, the ghost, Eva Coleman. Meanwhile, in Zurich, K black sedan parked silently outside the offices of the World Banking Trust. A man stepped out, young, polished, forgettable. He walked in, used a biometric access badge that shouldn't exist, and accessed the private vault. Inside wasn't money. It was leverage, Evidence, insurance policies, billionaires kept locked away for decades, until tonight, by morning copies of over 2,000 confidential internal memos from 13 global corporations were being circulated to regulators, journalists, and activists. The leaks were now methodical, coordinated, organized. Eva had become more than a woman. She was a movement, a ghost network of digital resistance, known only by a symbol, a janitor's cart with a USB glowing like fire. But all revolutions trigger a response. At a luxury resort in Dubai, 5 of the most powerful men in global finance gathered behind closed doors. Ex-military security, signal jammers, private airspace. "She's tearing down infrastructure," one of them barked. "What happens when the wrong governments fall?" "We should have buried her after the summit," another growled. A third leaned forward. "We don't need to find her. We need to lure her." Silence. Then he smiled. "Let's bait her with what she hates most." 3 weeks later, a new humanitarian initiative swept across the headlines. The Atlas Fund, a $10 billion global investment in education, clean water, and anti-corruption enforcement, led by Franklin Rowe, cleared of charges, rehabilitated by PR to the public. It looked like redemption. A former villain turning over a new leaf taught to Eva. It was gasoline. She sat in a hideout deep within the Albanian highlands, watching the press conference play out on multiple screens. Her face stayed cold, controlled, but her knuckles were white. Franklin wasn't just free. He was coming for her in plain sight. That night, her team met in silence. The network had grown hackers, journalists, ex-corporate insiders. Even one former intelligence agent, Daniel Frey, was there too. "This is a trap," he said. "He wants you to come out of hiding." "I know," Eva replied. "So you're..." Walking in, she looked around the room. "No, we all are." In a city where power and illusion blur, Eva Coleman walked into the Atlas Gala in Manhattan under a different name, a different face, and the same fire in her blood. The ballroom shimmered with artificial charm. Celebrities, billionaires, politicians, all clapping for a cause they barely understood. Franklin Rowe took the stage. The room went silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "what we build tonight will shape the next 100 years." Slipped through the crowd. Her earpiece buzzed with her team's updates. Firewall breach complete. Stage mic feeding audio to 5 newsrooms. Atlas offshore accounts confirmed and mapped. Eva approached the bar. A young woman in uniform was wiping glasses, just like Eva had once done. Their eyes met for half a second, silent. Recognition. Then Eva walked up to Franklin. "Nice speech," she said calmly. He turned, smiled. "You look familiar?" "I'm nobody," she replied. "But I cleaned up after people like you for years." He chuckled. "Well, I hope we left a good tip." "Actually," she said, pulling a small drive from her purse, "you left a trail." Security rushed toward Herb, but froze as dozens of guests pulled out phones and cameras. Daniel's voice crackled through every speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the screens. We're live." The ballroom darkened. Footage played. Fraudulent charity funnels, Atlas-linked lobbying bribes, cover-up memos signed by Franklin Rowe himself. The room erupted in horror. Screams, shouting. Franklin tried to speak, defend, deny. But this time, there were no firewalls, no golden parachutes, just truth. 3 days later, Franklin Rowe was arrested on international charges of financial fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. Eva didn't stay to watch. She was already gone. She resurfaced months later in Bangkok, under a new name, teaching encryption to university students. At night, she continued to investigate global AI abuse by governments. A different battle. A new front. She didn't seek fame. She didn't take credit. She just made sure that no one, no matter how rich or protected, could sleep comfortably knowing she might be watching. Because she had learned, years ago, in the quiet echo of a janitor's mop across cold marble floors, that justice didn't always come from the top. Sometimes it came from the shadows, from the ones they never saw coming. And by the time they noticed, hurt was already too late.